I never thought I'd reach the age of 67 and find myself at odds with my own family. My name is Orville Haddock, and all my life I've poured myself into building something lasting, only to find the very people I trusted most quietly plotting to claim it. Haddock Supply began humbly, in a small, dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of Mount Prospect. 38 years ago, Evelyn, my late wife, and I had taken a leap of faith, mortgaging our home to fund our first shipment of building materials. I remember sitting cross-legged on that empty concrete floor, cheap wine in paper cups, dreaming aloud of the future. "We're going to supply every major construction project in the county," I said, my voice echoing against the bare walls. Evelyn gave me that look she reserved just for me, a mix of love, hope, and that tiny glimmer of doubt that kept me grounded. "Start with one client, dreamer," she'd said softly. But even in her caution, I could see that she believed in me, in us. Evelyn never lived to see the company reach its full potential, supplying materials for nearly every major construction project in 3 neighboring counties. 5 years ago, pancreatic cancer stole her from me. The doctors gave her 6 months, but she lasted almost a year, working tirelessly until the very end. Twice a week, she'd come into the office, handling bookkeeping, checking contracts, correcting minor mistakes. "I don't want you to let everything fall apart when I'm gone," she'd say, fumbling through papers with her delicate fingers. What she couldn't know then was that the most fragile thing left behind wasn't the paperwork, but the bond with our only son, Calvin. Calvin had grown up in a comfort I never knew as a boy. Perhaps shielding him from hardship was a mistake. He had every advantage, a good education, opportunities, yet no real interest in Haddock Supply. After college, he bounced from one job to another, never staying more than a year, always searching for something I couldn't name. Evelyn defended him, saying, "He's finding himself. Give him time, Orville." And I believed her, convincing myself that youth required patience. When she became ill, Calvin visited more frequently, flowers in hand, chatting about his latest work at an advertising agency. Evelyn's eyes would light up. She was happy to see him engaged in something he loved. I, too, felt relief, though a small, uneasy voice whispered in my mind that his timing coincided suspiciously with our company landing a massive contract for a new shopping center. Occasionally, he'd ask in passing if we needed help with marketing. I politely declined, trusting the old ways of personal connections and reputation. But I noticed it. After Evelyn's death, visits dwindled, from once a week, then once a month, eventually only on holidays. I never pressured him. I had learned the hard way that relationships could not be forced. I continued my routine, work, friends, brief attempts at dating, but no woman could compare to her. Everything changed, too. Years ago, when Calvin announced his engagement to Beatrice Driscoll, I remember that first dinner like a scene frozen in time. Her perfectly styled brown hair, a dark blue dress with a pearl brooch, and the appraising gaze that roamed over my home as though judging its worth. "What a lovely house, Mr. Haddock," she said, eyes lingering on a painting Evelyn and I had bought from a local artist. It must be an antique, very distinctive. There was something subtle, almost condescending in her tone, but I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Calvin's loving eyes softened my judgment. After all, Evelyn always told me I was too quick to judge. The wedding was grand, Beatrice flawless, parents Harrison and Victoria Driscoll subdued yet present. Harrison, with his insurance background, subtly hinted that age and health were reasons to pass on the business. At the time, I smiled, thinking nothing of it. Now I know that was the first ripple of trouble. Post-wedding, the visits became frequent but unsettling. Beatrice brought decadent desserts, inquired pointedly about my health, her questions threaded, with the implication that I might be weak. "How's your blood pressure, Orville?" she asked, as if hoping for confirmation of frailty. Calvin spoke in hushed, cautious tones, always with a hint of concern that felt rehearsed rather than genuine. I even offered Calvin a role in the business, thinking that immersion might ignite his interest. "Dad, you know it's not my thing," he said gently. "I'm in advertising. Different world, different rules." I watched, a pang of disappointment in my chest. Beatrice, meanwhile, subtly undermined me, her presence a constant reminder that I was now being watched, evaluated, and judged. Then the warning signs began in earnest. I started feeling tired. Small tasks drained me. Stairs became a challenge. Dizziness visited without warning. Perry Kilmer, my deputy since the first warehouse, noticed the pallor creeping across my face. "Orville, you need a doctor," he said one morning after I had to sit mid-meeting. "This isn't right." I waved him off. Men of my generation didn't rush to doctors for every ache and fatigue until the day I couldn't get out of bed. Chest pain pinned me to the mattress. The ambulance came. Hospital tests revealed the gravity I'd ignored, a heart issue needing detailed attention. I waited 2 days after discharge to call Calvin, not wanting to trouble him. "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" His voice held real concern. "We would have come," I reassured him, downplaying the seriousness, though inside I knew otherwise. Soon after, Calvin and Beatrice arrived, bustling around my kitchen, fussing over soup and asking about tests. That evening, they even suggested I let Beatrice stay, overnight. I refused. I was accustomed to solitude, unwilling to feel patronized. They left, promising to return, but they came back, this time with Harrison and Victoria Driscoll. Their intrusion, framed as concern, felt more like a takeover. Harrison, surveying my home, asked pointedly about the business. "Who's running things while you're sick?" I assured him Perry managed well. "Still," he pressed, "a master's eye is important. Succession plans are vital." Beatrice and Calvin exchanged those telling glances, and I realized, with a sinking heart, that their concern was strategic, not heartfelt. That night, the conversation revolved around my health and my business. Beatrice made pointed remarks about timeliness and efficiency. Calvin suddenly took a keen interest in the minutiae of haddock supply. He even suggested visiting the office. I agreed, feeling a quiet pride that my son might finally understand the work of my lifetime. The next day, he arrived at the warehouse. I introduced him to the staff, showed him the warehouse, and explained ongoing projects. He asked many questions and took notes on his phone. He was especially interested in financial details, turnover, profit, the biggest contracts. "What is the legal structure of the company?" he asked when we were left alone in my office. "Is it on LLC or something else?" "LLC with one founder, me. And there are no other shareholders, not even minority shareholders. No, just me. Your mom used to own part of it, but after she died, it all passed to me." He nodded, making another note. I didn't pay much attention to the questioning at the time. I thought my son was finally showing an interest in what he would one day inherit. A week later, the results of all the tests came back. The diagnosis sounded threatening: coronary heart disease. Need an operation of aortic coronary bypass. The doctor said something about vasoconstriction, risk of heart attack, and the need for surgery as soon as possible. I called Calvin right after the appointment. "The surgery's in 10 days, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "It's no big deal, just a routine procedure at my age." There was a pause, and then there was whispering and rustling as if Calvin had his hand over the microphone and was talking to someone. "Dad, we'll be right there," he said at last. "Don't go anywhere." They showed up an hour later. Beatrice was in a strict suit, as if she were in a business meeting, not visiting her sick father-in-law. She sat down across from me and spoke in the tone one usually uses with small children. "Orville, Calvin, and I are very concerned about your condition. Heart surgery is serious. You need rest and no stress." "That's right," said Calvin. That's why we think you should step away from the business for a while. I can take over the company until you get better." I looked at my son, trying to see if he was joking. Calvin, who'd never been interested in business, suddenly decided to run it. "You have no experience in this field," I said as gently as I could. "Perry does just fine when I'm not here." "Dad, but I'm your son," he said, a begging tone in his voice. "This is our family business. Plus, I have a background in marketing, so I can bring something new to the table. After the surgery, I'll recover quickly and get back to work. There's no need to change anything." Beatrix stepped forward. Her eyes narrowed. "Orville, you don't understand the gravity of the situation. You're 67, and you have a serious heart condition. The doctors are talking about an operation that will take at least several months to recover from. The company can't be without management for that long. Perry's not family." She cut him off. "Calvin is your only son and heir. It makes sense that he should be the one to take over during this difficult period." I looked at my son, who avoided my gaze. He had always been weak-willed even as a child. Evelyn had said he was just soft and kind, but I could see he was too easily manipulated. Now it was obvious that it wasn't him speaking, but Beatrice speaking from his lips. "I will think about your proposal," I said to end this conversation. I needed to rest now. They left, but the next day, Calvin came alone. He looked guilty and fidgeted in the doorway before he decided to come in. "Dad, I want to apologize for yesterday. Beatrix is just worried about you." "We all are." I nodded, not wanting to argue. Calvin sat down next to me and suddenly spoke in a different tone of voice. "You know, I realize I've never been interested in the company. Mom always said it was your baby, and I didn't want to get in the way. But now that you're sick, I feel a responsibility. This is something you and Mom built together. I don't want it to go to someone else." There was logic in his words, and for a moment, I almost believed his intentions were sincere. But then I remembered his sudden interest in the legal structure of the company, Beatrix's insistence, and Harrison Driscoll's strange behavior. "Calvin, I appreciate your concern, but let's put this conversation on hold until after the surgery. Right now, I need to focus on my health." He nodded, but I noticed a shadow of disappointment on his face. As he left, he turned around in the doorway. "Dad, you know you can count on us, right? No matter what happens." It was the first time I really thought about the fact that behind all that talk of worry and concern, there might be something else going on. And the more I thought back to Calvin and Beatrix's behavior in recent weeks, the more disturbing the feeling became that my son and his wife were up to something. St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Mount Prospect greeted me with sterile cleanliness and the smell of antiseptic. The nurse, a full woman with kind eyes, filled out my paperwork, took my blood pressure, and escorted me to my room. It was a regular double room, but the second bed was empty. "Lucky you, Mr. Haytock. You'll be on your own for now," she said as she helped me get settled. "Dr. Phelps will be here in half an hour, but rest for now." Rest was the last thing I could think about. My mind was reeling with scraps of conversations. With Calvin and Beatrice, their persistent questions about the company, their sudden concern. Something about it all felt wrong, fake. But I couldn't articulate exactly what it was. Dr. Phelps, a tall man with sagebrush on his temples, explained in detail the nature of the upcoming surgery. Coronary bypass surgery. It sounded scary, but he said it's a routine procedure with a high success rate. "We'll create bypasses for blood around narrowed sections of coronary arteries," he explained, showing a diagram on a clipboard. "We'll use veins from your legs. The surgery will take about 5 hours, after which you'll spend a day or 2 in intensive care and then go back to your regular room." "When can I go back to work?" That was the question on my mind the most. Dr. Phelps frowned. "At least 2 months, and that's assuming a good recovery. Mr. Haddock, this is a major surgery. The first few weeks you'll have trouble even walking up the stairs. 2 months. Too long. To leave the company unattended, especially now that Calvin and Beatrice are taking such a suspicious interest. Perry came in the evening. He brought fruit, fresh magazines, and news from the office. "Everything's under control, boss," he said, settling into a chair by my bed. "The contract with Ever Construction is signed and deliveries will start next month. Northwood Development is still in negotiations, but I think we'll come to an agreement. Perry's worked with Meal most from the beginning. He came in as a simple loader, gradually rose to manager, and then became my right-hand man. Evelyn always said that if we had a second son, he'd be like Perry, reliable, hard-working, dedicated." "Perry?" I lowered my voice even though there was no one else in the room. "I need to have a serious talk with you about Calvin and Beatrice." His face turned serious in an instant. "Is something wrong?" I told him about my son and daughter-in-law's strange behavior, their sudden interest in the company, and their persistent offers to help. "They're up to something, Perry. I can feel it." He scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Calvin came by the office yesterday, asked about the management structure, about who makes decisions in your absence, said he wanted to keep abreast of the family business." "What did you tell him?" "Only that I have the right to sign documents and negotiate by proxy, but that you make all strategic decisions." He seemed disappointed. We were quiet for a while, digesting the information. "What do we do, boss?" "Nothing yet. I'll think about it. Just stay alert and keep me informed of what's going on in the company." In the morning, a young nurse came in, introduced herself as Ruby. She helped me wash up, took my blood pressure and temperature, brought me breakfast. "How are you feeling, Mr. Haddock?" "I've been better," I answered honestly. "It's normal to be anxious before surgery. After lunch, the anesthesiologist will come to you. We'll tell you about his part of the work. You're scheduled for surgery tomorrow. That's soon. I thought we'd have more time to prepare mentally. Ask Perry about cases. Maybe call an old friend, Winston Price, who's been our lawyer since the company was founded." Around noon, the chamber door opened and Calvin and Beatrice entered. His son looked worried, but Beatrice was as impeccable as ever. Strict suit, perfect makeup, not a single hair out of place. "Dad, how are you?" Calvin sat down on the edge of the bed and patted my arm awkwardly. "We came as soon as we heard you'd been admitted to the hospital." "Who told you?" "I didn't call anyone." "Perry did," Beatrice answered quickly. "He did the right thing. We're family. We should know about these things." Perry: "Strange. He didn't mention it yesterday, but maybe he called after we talked. The surgery's tomorrow." I said, "It's no big deal, just routine." "Tomorrow?" Beatrice looked at Calvin. "So soon? The doctors think it's best not to take too long." "How long will you be in the hospital?" Calvin asked. "A week? Maybe a little more, then home to recuperate." That look between them again. They were up to something. But what? The morning of the surgery, 3 hours before, Winston walked into the room, a tall, thin man with piercing blue eyes and a completely bald head. "We've known each other for 40 years, and in that time he hasn't changed much, except that none of his red hair is gone. You look pretty good for a man about to have his chest opened," he said, instead of greeting me. "And you're still as tactless as ever," I grinned. Winston pulled a folder of papers out of his briefcase. "I've prepared a power of attorney for Perry with the broadest possible powers. He'll be able to run the company, sign contracts, manage accounts. Anything except selling assets and changing the founder would still require your signature." I looked it over and signed it. "The will is more complicated," Winston continued. "You need witnesses and a notary to change it. I can arrange that after your discharge." "Yeah." "What if something goes wrong?" "Don't squawk, Orville. Everything will be fine. But if you insist, we can draw up a preliminary draft now and formalize it later." We were beginning to discuss the details of the new will when the door of the room opened. I expected to see a nurse, but it was Beatrice. She froze on the threshold when she saw Winston. "Oh, you have a visitor. I won't disturb you." Shettried to close the door, but I stopped her. Batrick, come in. Have you met Winston Price, our corporate lawyer? She entered, smiling tensely. No, I haven't had the pleasure. Beatrix Haddock, Calvin's wife. She extended her hand for a handshake. Winston Price, my friend replied dryly, shaking her palm lightly. Orville and I are discussing some legal matters before the operation. What kind of issues? She asked quickly. Business ones, I answered evasively. A power of attorney for Perry, so he can run the company while I'm in treatment. Didn't Calvin talk to you about that? He's your son, your heir. Wouldn't it make sense to let him run it? Calvin's never worked at the company and he doesn't know the business. Perry's an experienced executive who knows the ins and outs, but it's a family business. There was a note of irritation in her voice. I woke up in the emergency room, surrounded by the beeping of monitors and the noise of machines. My chest hurt like a truck had driven over it. There was a lump in my throat, from the intubation tube, which had already been removed. The nurse noticed I was awake and leaned over to me. Welcome back, Mr. Haddock. The surgery was a success. You're in the ICU and you'll be moved to regular rooms soon. On the 5th day after surgery, I felt well enough to ask the nurse for my cell phone. I wanted to call Perry and ask if Calvin or Beatrice had tried to interfere with the company. The nurse brought my phone from the safe with my personal belongings and left me alone. I was already dialing the number when I heard familiar voices in the hallway. Beatrice and her mother. Yeah, that was definitely Victoria Driscoll's voice. They stopped right outside my room, apparently unaware that I was out of the ICU. Are you sure he's still in there? Victoria asked. Yes, I checked. With the nurse. He won't be transferred here until tomorrow, Beatrice lied. We have time to talk. I froze, trying to breathe as quietly as I could so I wouldn't miss a word. I don't like that lawyer, Victoria continued. He obviously suspects something. Sue Price has always been loyal to Orville, Beatrice replied irritably. But that doesn't matter. It matters that the old man signed the power of attorney for his deputy and not for Calvin. Is that a problem? Of course it's a problem. If Calvin had gotten the power of attorney, we could act now. We'll have to wait until Orville is completely weakened. I felt a chill go down my spine. They were really plotting against me. Are you sure he won't get better? Victoria asked. The doctors say it's going to be a long recovery. He's 67, Mom. A lot of people don't get back to a full life after an operation like that. He'll be weak, dependent on medication. We just need to convince him he can't run the business anymore, and if he refuses, then we have a backup plan. Beatrice lowered her voice and I had to strain to hear. I spoke to Dr. Reeves. These patients are often prescribed strong painkillers that affect their mental clarity. If you petition the court for a declaration of incompetence supported by medical evidence, you want to declare him incompetent. Victoria sounded surprised, but not shocked. It's a big step, Beatrice. We have no choice, Mother. The business will soon be ours with only one signature left for this old man. And if he refuses to sign voluntarily, we'll have to do things differently. Is Calvin on board with this plan? Calvin does as I say, Beatrice replied sharply. He's always been a weakling. He inherited his mother's temper. They moved on down the hall, and the voices became indistinct. I lay there, stunned by what I'd heard. Beatrice was planning to declare me incompetent and take the business. And Calvin, my only son, was in on the plan. I called Perry and asked him to come as soon as possible. Then I dialed Winston's number. I need to change my will right away, I said without preamble. And not just the will. We need a complete overhaul of the company's ownership structure. What's wrong? Winston asked wordly. I'll explain everything when we meet. But I'll tell you one thing. You were right when you told me to be careful. Beatrice and Calvin are really up to something. I spent another week in the hospital watching Beatrix play unfold. She came in daily, always with flowers or fruit, speaking in a quiet, caring voice, and always asking if I needed anything. Calvin accompanied her, but he looked uncomfortable, avoided making eye contact with me, and was mostly silent. Perry also visited me regularly, usually in the afternoon when Beatrix and Calvin had already left. He kept me up to date on the company's affairs, and I briefed him, pretending I was just interested in current projects. In reality, Winston and I were setting a trap for my caring relatives. Winston came twice, each time with new documents. We meticulously thought out every detail of our plan. I officially created a trust into which I transferred all of the company's assets. Perry was appointed trustee with broad powers but strict restrictions on selling assets or changing the ownership structure. Sure enough, it's an ironclad defense, Winston assured me after I signed the last document. Even if they try to challenge your ability to act, the trust has already been set up and is operating independently. Beatrix can turn herself inside out, but she won't get control of the company. And Calvin, I asked, still pained at the thought of betraying my son. The trust stipulated that he could get a certain share of Thestock, but only if he had been with the company for at least 5 years and had demonstrated competence. It's a joint decision between you and Perry. I nodded, satisfied with the compromise. I didn't want to disinherit Calvin completely. He was my son after all, even if he was influenced by his wife. But I wasn't about to put the business that Evelyn and I had spent a lifetime building in the hands of greedy Beatrix. Dr. Phelps was pleased with my recovery and promised to discharge me in a couple of days. I deliberately did not inform Beatrix and Calvin of this, deciding to let them make their move, which I was sure would not be long in coming. And indeed, the day after the conversation with Dr. Phelps, Beatrix came not at the usual morning time, but towards evening. With her was not Calvin, but a tall, thin man with a briefcase, whom she introduced as Elliot Ramsey, a lawyer. "Orville, this is Mr. Ramsey," she said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "He specializes in business and probate matters. Kelvin and I thought you might need a consultation." I feigned slight confusion. Consultation? What kind of counseling? "Well, you know," she sat down on the edge of the bed, lowering her voice to a confidential whisper. "After a major surgery like this, a lot of people think about the future, how to ensure business continuity, how to protect their legacy." "Where's Calvin?" I asked, ignoring her hints. He had an important meeting with a client," she answered, quickly. "He told me to tell you he'd stop by later. I knew that was a lie. Calvin just couldn't bring himself to participate in this spectacle. Even he, with all his weakness, realized how low they'd fallen." "Minus Mr. Haddock," Ramsey spoke up. "Your sister-in-law has told me about your situation. I've prepared some documents that will help ensure a smooth transition of the company's management into your son's hands in case you feel you're having trouble keeping up with the workload." He took a folder of papers out of his briefcase and placed it on the bedside table. I took my time picking it up instead, scrutinizing Ramsey. He didn't look like a respectable corporate lawyer, too nervous-looking, too cheap a suit. More like a small-time businessman Beatrix had found to do her dirty work. "What kind of documents have you prepared?" I asked, trying to keep my voice low and uncertain. "It's a power of attorney to manage the business." Ramsey opened the folder and showed me the first document. It gives Calvin the right to make all decisions about the company to act on your behalf. Technically, you're still the owner, but all the powers are transferred to your son. And the second document, he continued, showing the next paper, is a preliminary agreement on the transfer of shares. It will come into effect only if you decide to retire completely from the business, or he hesitated. "If your health prevents you from running the company, you mean if I'm declared incapacitated?" I asked bluntly. Beatrix flinched and Ramsey awkwardly adjusted his tie. "It's standard wording, Mr. Haytock, just a legal precaution. No one expects such a thing to happen." "Of course, Orville," Beatrix said, putting her hand on my shoulder with fake concern. "It's just to be on the safe side. We all hope you'll recover quickly and get back to work. But while you're recovering, Calvin could take over. You need peace, not thestress of constant business problems." I looked at the papers, then at Beatrix, then at Ramsey. They were waiting, holding their breath. They probably thought I was weakened by illness, perhaps not quite sure what was going on or just didn't want to argue. "Can I take a closer look?" I asked, holding out my hand for the folder. Ramsey readily handed me the documents. I looked slowly through the first few pages, pretending to have trouble reading the fine print. "There's a lot of legal terms in here," I mumbled. "I'm not sure I understand everything." I can explain any point that raises questions," Ramsey offered with a professional smile. "No need." I handed the folder back to him. "I trust my lawyer. He has to review these documents before I sign anything." "Your lawyer?" Beatrice couldn't hide her irritation. "Orville, that won't be necessary. Mr. Ramsey is highly qualified. These documents are standard. There are no pitfalls. However, I prefer Winston Price to check them. He's been running the company for 40 years. But that would take time," she objected. "And you're checking out in a few days?" "The logical thing to do would be to do it now so that everything would be ready when you check out." "I'm in no hurry," I said calmly. "But if the papers are in order, Winston will tell me and I'll sign them." Beatrice was obviously displeased, but she tried to hide it behind a mask of concern. "Of course, if that makes you feel more at ease. I just wanted to save you the trouble." "I appreciate your concern, Beatrice," I said with a smile she couldn't quite decipher. "But some things I prefer to do in my own way." She exchanged a quick glance with Ramsey. "Perhaps we could invite Mr. Price here then," the lawyer suggested, "so that he could review the documents on the spot and give you his recommendations." They obviously didn't want to let the situation get out of hand. Perhaps they were afraid Winston would see something in the documents that I might have missed. "That's a great idea," I agreed, deciding to play along. "I'll call him right now." I reached for the phone on the bedside table, dialed Winston's number, and put it on speaker so they could hear the conversation. "Winston Price here," came his clear voice. "Winston, this is Orville. Could you come to the hospital? I've got Beatrice and her lawyer here, and they've brought some papers for me to sign. I'd like you to check them out." "Papers?" I could hear the surprise in his voice. "What documents?" "Sheriari. A power of attorney for Calvin to run the company in some kind of preliminary stock transfer agreement." "Orville, don't sign anything until I get there," Winston said firmly. "I'll be there in 40 minutes. Thank you, friend." I turned off the speakerphone and put it down. Beatrice looked tense, and Ramsey was obviously nervous, fiddling with the handle of his briefcase. "Maybe we should reschedule this conversation for another day," he suggested, glancing at the door. "I still have appointments today." "No, stay." I looked him straight in the eye. "Winston will be here soon and we'll talk it over. I'm sure. You, as a professional lawyer, have a vested interest in making sure it's done right." Ramsey nodded awkwardly, unable to find a decent excuse to back out. Beatrice sat down in a chair by the window, clearly unhappy with the way the situation was unfolding. We spent the next 30 minutes in tense silence, occasionally interrupted by her attempts at small talk, which I politely but firmly rebuffed. When the door of the room opened and Winston came in, I could almost physically feel the atmosphere in the room grow even more tense. He nodded to me, said a brief hello to Beatrice, and introduced himself as Ramsey. "So, what documents did you bring for my client?" he asked, getting straight to the point. Ramsey reluctantly handed him a folder. Winston flipped through the documents quickly, his face impassive. But I, having known him for years, could see the expression in his eyes change as he read. "Mr. Ramsey," he said at last, closing the folder. "These documents are grossly flawed. The power of attorney is unreasonably broad, and the preliminary stock transfer agreement contains clauses that effectively disqualify my client from having a say in the management of the company, even though he retains formal ownership." "That's standard language," Ramsey tried to object, but Winston interrupted him. "No, they're not. I've been practicing corporate law for almost 45 years, and I can say with certainty that no conscientious lawyer would draft documents in this way, if he or she was acting in the client's best interests and not those of third parties. Beatrix stood up abruptly. "What do you mean, Mr. Price? Calvin and I only want to help Orville. In that case, it's strange that you brought your own lawyer, rather than contacting me or another specialist who is already working with Mr. Haytock's company." Winston parried. "We didn't want to bother you." Beatrice tried to remain calm, but I could see her nervously clutching the strap of her purse. Orville had just undergone a major operation, and we wanted to organize everything as quickly and comfortably as possible. Comfortable? I mean, Winston raised an eyebrow, offering to sign documents that would effectively take away his control of his own company. "It's not like that," Beatrice exclaimed, losing her composure. "We just wanted to help with the management while he recovers. I decided it was time to intervene. So far, I had let the situation develop on its own, watching their reactions. But now, it was time for the climax. "Hanem Beatrice," I said, and my voice, to their surprise, sounded firm and strong, not like an old man weakened by illness. "I know that you and your mother have discussed plans to declare me incompetent if I refuse, to hand over the business voluntarily. I heard your conversation in the hallway 5 days ago." She turned pale, her eyes widened in shock. "What? No, it's a misunderstanding. You misunderstood. I got it right." I interrupted her. "And I also realized that Calvin, my own son, allowed himself to be manipulated by you for money. Orville, you're not being fair to Calvin. She tried to change tactics. He does care about you. We both do. So much so that you're willing to call me crazy and take away my business." I shook my head. "Don't bother denying it, Beatrice. I've heard. Enough." Ramsey, sensing that the situation was getting out of hand, started gathering documents. "I think we should revisit this conversation later when everyone is calmer. There will be no later, Mr. Ramsey," I said firmly. "And you can take your papers. I won't be needing them." "What do you mean?" Beatrix asked, her voice trembling. "I mean that while you and Calvin were making plans to take over my company, I took precautions. Winston, perhaps you could explain." My old friend nodded and pulled a file folder from his briefcase. "Minus Mr. Haddock has set up an irrevocable trust into which he has transferred all of the company's assets. Perry Kilmer has been appointed trustee of the trust with detailed duties on restrictions. No shares can be sold, transferred, or pledged without Mr. Haydock's written consent, and after his death without the unanimous decision of the trust's 3-member board of trustees, including me." Beatrice stood as if struck by thunder. Her face turned white at first, then red. "You can't. It's not fair. Calvin is your son, your heir." "Aha. Calvin will get a share of the stock, but only if he works for the company and proves himself competent," I said calmly. "I'm not going to disinherit him completely. But I'm also not going to let you and him ruin what Evelyn and I have spent a lifetime building. You can't do this to us." Beatrice was almost shouting. "We took care of you, came every day, brought you fruit flowers. For the company, not for me," I replied. "And let's be honest, Beatrice, you've never hidden your attitude towards me. To you, I was always just an old man standing in the way of the money you thought was yours. That's not true." She turned to Ramsey. "Tell him. Explain that it can't just change his will. Set up some kind of trust. There must be legal ways to challenge it." Ramsey looked confused and clearly regretted getting involved in this story. "Yeah, I'm not an expert on trust, Mrs. Haytock. I need to study the documents, consult with my colleagues." "You're useless." She cut me off and turned to me. "This isn't over, Orville. Calvin will be furious. You will regret this." "No, Beatrice." Ishook, my head. "Doubters, Farnham. The only thing I regret is not seeing your true nature sooner. And I hope Calvin will one day find the strength to break free of your influence." She grabbed her purse and ran out of the room, slamming the door so hard that the nurse in the next room looked out to see what was going on. Ramsay muttered an awkward apology and hurried after her, leaving Winston and me alone. Well, that was dramatic, my friend said after a moment of silence. Yes, he leaned back on the pillows, suddenly feeling tired but necessary. Now they know I'm not a helpless victim. Are you sure you want to leave a loophole for Calvin? Winston asked. After all this time, I sighed, thinking of my son. Despite his betrayal, I still remembered holding him in my arms as a baby, teaching him how to ride a bike. How proud I was of his first successes. He's my son, Winston, the only thing I have left of Evelyn. I can't just cut him out of my life, but I won't let him have everything on a silver platter, especially not while he's under Beatrix's thumb. I see. Winston nodded. What now? Do you think they'll back off? Sakura. Beatrice, never. She's too greedy and ambitious. But now that she knows I've taken action, it'll be a lot harder for her to act. And Calvin? I shrugged. Who knows? Maybe this will make him think about which side he's on. Either way, the company is protected. Winston patted my shoulder. You have nothing to worry about. Perry can handle it, and you can recover in peace. Thank you, friend. He squeezed his hand. I couldn't have done it without you and Perry. Winston smiled, but his eyes remained serious. They might still try something. Don't let your guard down. I won't, I promised. Now that I knew who I was dealing with, I'd be ready for whatever they were up to. After Winston left, I lay there for a long time, staring out the window at the evening sky. The thoughts of my sons. Betrayal still hurt, but I felt strangely relieved that I had finally told Beatrice what I thought. No more pretending to be weak and helpless. I had won this fight, but the war I knew was just beginning. The phone on the nightstand vibrated. A message from Calvin. Dad, we need to talk. I'm coming over tomorrow by myself. Please hear me out. I set the phone aside without answering. Tomorrow would be a new day and a new round of this family drama, but now I was better prepared for it than ever. You're right. I broke the plan at the end of the chapter, which indicated that Orville was facing a cold war on the part of son and daughter-in-law rather than reconciliation. Correcting that point, the morning was overcast as my thoughts. I was reviewing the discharge summary the nurse brought in when the room door opened, and Calvin walked in alone as promised in the message. He looked gaunt, shadows under his eyes as if he'd been up all night. Hey, Dad, he said quietly, pausing at the door as if hesitant to come in fully. Come on in. I set the papers aside. Sit down, he sang awkwardly into the chair by Thebes, his hands nervously clasped between his knees. How are you feeling? Better than one might expect, I replied. Dr. Phelps says the recovery is going well. They're discharging Metaday. That's good, he stammered, clearly unsure how to begin the main conversation. I decided not to make it easy for him. After everything that had happened, he had to find the words himself. Beatrice told me about yesterday, he finally said, about the trust and that you heard them talking to her mother. What did you think of that? I asked, watching his reaction carefully. Calvin looked up, his eyes a mixture of shame and stubbornness. You shouldn't have gone behind our backs, Dad. Setting up a trust, changing the terms of the inheritance without consulting me, I couldn't. Believe my ears. He made it sound like he was the injured party, not me. Were you supposed to be discussing how to declare me incompetent and take over the company? My voice got rougher. Is that normal, do you think? That's not what Beatrice meant, he countered quickly. She was just worried about the future of the company, about our future. You're not being entirely fair. Fair? I felt the anger rising inside that I'd been holding back for too long. Calvin, she was talking about incapacitating me if I didn't sign, voluntarily. Called me an old man who stands in your way and you let her do it. I didn't know about everything she was planning. He lowered his head. I swear, Dad. She was only talking about convincing you to hand over control of the company while you were sick. so you could recover in peace. And you believe that concern after all these years of her barely containing her contempt for me after. The two of you showed no interest in the company until I got sick. Calvin remained silent, avoiding my gaze. I sighed, suddenly feeling tired. Do you know what hurts the most, son? It wasn't that Beatrice wanted to take the company away. I've always seen right through her. What hurts is that you, my only son, let her manipulate you against your own father. I loved Mom, he said suddenly, and his voice trembled. You know how much I loved her, and after she died, you just plunged into your work as if nothing had happened. You didn't even cry at the funeral. It was like a punch in the gut. I didn't expect him to take it that way. You think I didn't grieve? I asked quietly, just because I didn't cry in front of everyone. Your mother and I lived together for 39 years. Every day after she died, I wake up and forget for a second that she's gone, and then reality comes crashing down again. But you never talked about it. Calvin raised his eyes to me, eyes full of old pain. Never shared your feelings. Always been the strong, unwavering Orville Haddock who only thinks about business. Because that's what your mother wanted. I shook my head. She made me promise not to lose heart, to go on living, to take care of the company and you. That was her last command. The company and me? Calvin grinned bitterly. But the company always came first, didn't it? No, I said firmly. You came first. Always. You just didn't see it. Why do you think your mother and I worked so hard? So you could have everything. We didn't. So you could go to a good college, have a good life without knowing the hardships we went through. Calvin was silent, considering my words. Finally, he sighed and rubbed his face with his hands. It's all so messed up, Dad. Beatrix is furious about the trust. She says we should challenge it in court. Let her try, I shrugged. I have to instance. Paperwork was impeccable. But that's not the point, Calvin. It's about the trust you broke. The fact that you let your wife plot against your father. I didn't know about everything, he repeated. I swear I didn't know that she'd discussed with your mother about declaring you incompetent. Perry arrived at noon, helped me pack and check out. On the way home, he talked about the company's business, trying to take my mind off my heavy thoughts. The contract with Northwood Development is signed, he said proudly. They've agreed to all of our terms. It's going to be the biggest project of the year. Great job, Perry. I smiled gratefully. What would I do without you? Come on, boss. It's a win-win for all of us. There was a surprise waiting for me at home. Mrs. Jenkins, my neighbor, had prepared the house for my return. Everything was clean to a shine. There was a home-cooked meal waiting in the refrigerator, and on the table was a bouquet of fresh flowers with a note, "Get well soon, your neighbor Martha." On the 5th day after returning home, the doorbell rang. Beatrice stood on the doorstep, dressed in an austere navy blue suit with perfect hair and manicure. She looked as if she had come for a business meeting, not to visit her sick father-in-law. "Orville," she said coldly, "may I come in?" I stepped back silently, letting her into the house. She walked into the living room, taking in the cleanliness and order with an appraising glance. "I see your neighbor did a good job," she said. Disdain barely concealed in her voice. "Calvin and I wanted to get the house ready for you too, but I guess we got ahead of ourselves. What do you want, Beatrice?" I didn't pretend to be glad to see her. She sat down in the chair with her purse on her lap as if she were preparing for battle. "I came to talk about the trust you set up. It's unfair to Calvin and to me." "Unfair?" I chuckled. "Wow, Entor. And planning to declare me incapacitated is fair. You misunderstood that conversation. Chet tried to play innocent. I never wanted to hurt you. I only cared about the future of the company. Beatrice, let's not play these games." I sank tiredly into the chair across from her. "We both know you're only interested in money. You've never hidden your attitude towards me." Beatrice stood up, her face flushed with anger. "You're going to regret this, Orville. We'll challenge this trust in court." We'll prove that you were incapacitated when you signed the documents. Try it." I stood up too, looking her straight in the eye. "Winston has a medical report that I was fully competent at the time the trust was created, signed by 3 independent experts." She stalked out of the house, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. I slowly sank back into the chair, feeling my heart pounding. The phone rang an hour later. It was Calvin. "Dad, what did you say to Beatrice?" He sounded upset. She came back hysterical, packing, saying we're moving in with her parents. I just explained the terms of the trust to her. "I," replied calmly, "the same thing I told you this morning. You can get a share in the company if you work there for 5 years, but that's too long." And he exclaimed, and I heard in his voice the same intonation as Beatrice's. 5 years is half a decade. "I know how to count, son," I said dryly. "And 5 years is not a long time for the work to which I have devoted my life." The next weeks passed in tense silence. Calvin didn't call, and I didn't dial his number. I learned from Perry that he and Beatrix had indeed moved in with her parents and had consulted with several lawyers about the possibility of contesting the trust, but had received disappointing prognosis. I was recovering from surgery, gradually, increasing my physical activity. After a month, I started making short visits to the office, and after 6 weeks, I was back to full-time work. Perry was doing great, but I missed the company, the people, the feeling of doing something important. I still hadn't heard from Calvin. Occasionally, I saw his car drive by the house, but he never stopped. Mrs. Jenkins said she saw him and Beatrix at the store. They were arguing about something, and they looked tense. One evening, Perry dropped by my house with a file of papers that needed my signature. "Sean, how you feeling, boss?" he asked, making himself comfortable in the living room. "Not bad," I shrugged. "The doctors say the recovery is going better than expected." "How are things going with Calvin?" he asked cautiously. "Any news?" "Nothing," I shook my head. Complete silence. "I think Beatrice won't let him talk to me. She's always struck me as a complicated person," Perry said diplomatically. "She's a calculating who only sees my son as having access to money," I said sharply. "And the saddest part is that Calvin lets her manipulate him. He always had." Perry paused, apparently unsure of what to say. "You know, sometimes I think," I continued, "maybe it's my fault. Maybe I worked too hard when he was little, didn't teach him enough to stand his ground to have his own opinion. Treehar, don't blame yourself." Perry put his hand on my shoulder. "You were a good father. It's just that sometimes kids choose their own path, and it's not always the path we envision for them." I nodded gratefully, but the weight on my heart didn't lessen. Every day, I hoped Calvin would come to his senses, come to talk. But the phone was silent, and he never crossed the threshold of my house. About 2 months after I was discharged, I ran into Calvin at the supermarket. He was standing by the cereal shelf, looking tired and gaunt. When he saw me, he froze for a moment as if he didn't know whether to run or stay. "Hi, Calvin," I said, coming closer. "Hi, Dad?" He shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. "How are you recovering?" "The doctors are happy with the progress." "That's good." He nodded, avoiding my eyes. There was an awkward pause. I waited for him to say something else, but he remained silent, nervously tugging at his shirt sleeve. "How's Beatrice?" I asked at last. "Fine," he shrugged. "Still mad about the trust. Her parents, too. We're living with them now." "I heard that," I nodded. "How's it going with the Driscolls?" "It's not easy," he grimaced. "Mom, they're always talking about how unfair you are and how we should fight for our inheritance. What do you think?" I looked him carefully in the eye. "I don't know what to think, Dad," he said honestly. "Everything is so confused. Beatrix says one thing, you say another. I just want it all to be over." "It's in your hands, son." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Sheriff, you can always come work for the company. Learn the business from the inside. 5 years will go by and you'll get your share. Beatrice will never agree to that." He shook his head. "She thinks it's humiliating to work for something that should be ours by right." "What right, Calvin?" I couldn't contain my irritation. You never took an interest in the company until you had a quick opportunity to take control. That's not entitlement. That's greed." His face closed. His eyes grew cold. "You never understood me, Dad. Never tried to see my side. Did you try to see mine?" I parried. "Understand what it's like when your only son and his wife plan to declare you incompetent to take away your life's work?" We stood in the middle of the supermarket looking at each other like strangers. It wasn't just resentment or misunderstanding, but a gulf that might never be bridged. "I have to go," Calvin said at last. "Beatrice is waiting." "Of course she is," I grinned bitterly. "She's always waiting." He turned and walked quickly toward the exit, leaving his shopping cart in the aisle. I stared after him, feeling ache in my chest. Perhaps I had just lost my son for good. It had been 6 months since the surgery. The doctor said my recovery was going great, better than many patients my age. I returned to work, although now I tried not to stay late at the office and paid more attention to my health. I went to the swimming pool 3 times a week, watched my diet, and had regular checkups with my cardiologist. But while physically I was getting stronger, emotionally I still felt broken. Meeting Calvin at the supermarket was our last face-to-face contact. After that silence, no calls, no texts, no visits. It was like I never had a son. I heard from Perry that Beatrice had found a lawyer who'd agreed to take their case, some young upstart from a small firm specializing in shady lawsuits. Winston grinned when I told him about it. "Let them spend the money," he said. "The trust is impeccable. Even if they find Clarence Darrow himself, they won't be able to challenge it. But the fact that Calvin went through with it—" I shook my head, still unable to believe my son's betrayal. "My own child is suing me. Technically, Beatrice is suing me as guardian of his interests," Winston clarified, "but that doesn't change the point." "Sorry, man." I plunged into my work, trying not to think about family problems. The company was thriving. We'd won a bid to supply materials for a new apartment complex, opened an additional warehouse in a neighboring county, and expanded our staff. Perry's management was brilliant, and my presence gave the employees confidence in the company's stability. But with each passing day, I realized something had changed. Not in the business, in me. Work used to be my life's work. After Evelyn's death, it was my salvation, a way of not thinking about the loss. Now I found myself more and more tired. Tired of endless meetings, negotiations, paperwork. Tired of being responsible for dozens of people who depended on my decisions. One evening, after staying late at the office, I went to the roof of our building. From there, I had a view of Mount Prospect, the cozy little town that had become our home nearly 40 years ago. I looked up at the twinkling lights and thought about how my life had changed. The company that Evelyn and I had started in a tiny warehouse on the outskirts now occupied a 3-story building in the business center. We employed over 50 people. We supplied materials for some of the largest construction projects in the region. But what did it all mean now? That I was alone. When the one person I wanted to share success with, my son, betrayed me for money. What would happen to the company after I died? The trust may have protected it from Beatrice, but who would continue the business I dedicated my life to? Perry found me up there on the roof, staring at nothing. "Boss, are you okay?" he asked anxiously. "I've been looking all over for you." "Just thinking, Perry," I smiled weakly. "About life, about the company, about the future." He came over and stood beside me, looking out over the city. "It's a beautiful view," he remarked. "I've never come up here. I used to come here a lot, especially in hard times. I used to look at the city and think that everything would work out somehow. And it did, didn't it?" He smiled. We've survived 2 economic crises, the loss of several major clients, a warehouse fire in 2008. And we've always come out stronger than we were. Yeah, I nodded. But then Evelyn was there for me. She always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. And now I couldn't finish the sentence. Now there's me, Perry said simply, and Winston, and all of our employees, many of whom have been here for over a decade. We're your family, boss. Maybe not in blood, but in spirit. His words touched me to the core. Suddenly, as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes, I realized I'd been looking for the answer in the wrong place all along. I'd clung to the idea of the family business, to the dream that Calvin would someday carry on my business. But my real family was here, right beside me. People who believed in me, supported me through the hard times, rejoiced in my successes. Thank you, Perry. I put my hand on his shoulder. You always know what to say. Just telling it like it is. He shrugged. Let's go home, boss. It's getting late. That night, I slept well for the first time in a long time. And in the morning, I woke up with a clear understanding of what I needed to do next. First thing I did was call Winston and ask him to come to my house. He arrived an hour later, concerned about my urgent call. "Shernam, what's wrong?" he asked, as soon as he stepped through the door. "Did Calvin and Beatrix do something?" "No, it's nothing like that," I reassured him. "I've just made a decision, and I want to go over the legal details with you." We sat down in the living room, and I outlined my plan. Winston listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, pondering what he had heard. "Are you sure?" Heffinally asked. "Oh, this is a serious step, Orville. It's irreversible." "As sure as I've ever been," I said firmly. "It's the right decision for me, for the company, for everyone. Then I'll prepare the necessary paperwork." He nodded. "But you'll have to tell Calvin. He has to hear about it from you, not from official papers." "I'll write him a letter," I said after a pause. "He wouldn't pick up the phone if I called anyway." Winston nodded understandingly and left, promising to return in a few days with the papers. I sat down to write a letter to my son, the hardest letter I'd ever written. "Dear Calvin, I thought long and hard about whether to write to you, but I decided that you should hear about my decision directly from me, not from the lawyers. After much deliberation, I have decided to completely change the terms of the trust that runs the company. From now on, you will not be able to take a stake in the business, not after 5 years of employment or in any other way. Instead, I'm selling the company to employees under an ESOP, Employee Stock Ownership Plan. This means that anyone who has worked at Haddock Supply for more than 3 years will have the opportunity to become part owner of the business in proportion to their length of service and contribution to the company. This was not an easy decision, but I believe it is a fair one. These people have dedicated years of their lives to the company, put their heart and soul into it, and helped it grow and prosper. They've earned the right to own what they helped create. As for you, I will not leave you without an inheritance. You'll get a house and a certain amount of money that will allow you to live comfortably, but the company will no longer be connected to our family. I know you probably see this as revenge or punishment, but believe me, it's not. This decision has been very difficult for me, but recent events have shown that you don't value the business that your mother and I have spent our lives building. To you, it's just a source of money, an asset that you can get and cash in. And I can't allow my life's work to become an object of strife and greed. I hope someday you'll understand why I made this decision. And maybe when Beatrix realizes there's nothing more to share, you can build your life on something more substantial than money. No matter what, you are my son, and I love you. Your father, Orville. I reread the letter several times, making edits, trying to find the right words. Finally satisfied that I had said everything I wanted to say, I sealed it in an envelope and set it aside, deciding to send it after all the documents were prepared and signed. The next day, I gathered all the key people in the company, those who had worked with me over the years in the conference room. Perry, of course, was there too, although he didn't know the purpose of the meeting. "Thank you for coming," he began as everyone took their seats. "I have an important announcement to make, one that concerns the future of the company and each of you personally." I looked around at the familiar faces, people with whom I had been through ups and downs, the joys and difficulties. They were looking at me with interest and a little trepidation. Such sudden meetings did not usually bode well. "As you know, I have recently had some health problems," I continued, "and although I'm feeling fine now, the situation has made me think about the future, my future, and the future of the company." I paused to collect my thoughts. "I have decided to sell Haddock Sapley, but not to some outside investor or competitor. I'm selling the company to you, the people who helped build it all these years." A surprised whisper ran through the room. Perry straightened in his chair, his eyes wide. "I'm creating an employee stock ownership plan, an ESOP. That means everyone who has worked here for more than 3 years will have the opportunity to become part owner of the business. Everyone's share will depend on length of service and contribution to the development of the company." I explained the basic principles of an ESOP, how the trust would work, how the shares would be distributed, what rights and responsibilities the employee shareholders would have. When I finished, there was silence in the room. "Boss, are you sure?" Perry finally asked. "What about Calvin? I thought you wanted the company to stay in the family." "I thought so too, Perry." I smiled sadly. "But sometimes we have to admit that our dreams don't match reality. Calvin's never been interested in business. To him, it was just money, nothing more. And you guys, you are the real Haddock Sapley family. People who put their heart and soul into it, who care about its well-being and prosperity. But you're not leaving Lisa, our CFO, who had been with the company for almost 15 years, asked, wordly. So not right away, I reassured her. I will remain chairman of the board of directors and will help with the transition period, but I'll gradually move away from operational management. Perry will become CEO if he's willing, of course. All eyes turned to Perry. He looked stunned. "Yeah, of course I'm in," he finally squeezed out. "But boss, this is too sudden." "I understand," I nodded. "So I suggest we all take some time to think about it. Winston is preparing the documents, and in a week I'll invite each of you to an individual meeting to discuss the details. No one is required to participate in an ESOP if they don't want to. It is completely voluntary." After the meeting, Perry stayed late to talk to me privately. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" he asked, and you could hear the resentment in his voice. "I thought we were friends." "Sorry, we are friends, Perry." I put my hand on his shoulder. "That's why I wanted this to be official and transparent, so no one could say I was giving you the company out of friendship. You've earned this place with your hard work, your dedication." He paused for a moment, considering my words. "What about Calvin?" he finally asked. "Does he know about your decision?" "He'll know soon enough," I sighed. I wrote him a letter. "I'll send it to him when the paperwork's ready." "He'll be furious," Perry shook his head. "And Beatrice, too. They might try to challenge that decision, too." "Let them try," I shrugged. Winston would make sure everything was legally perfect. Besides, it's perfectly legal to sell a company to employees. A lot of businesses go that way. The week passed in a flurry of meetings and discussions. Every employee who fit the ESOP criteria received individual counseling from Winston and me. We explained details, answered questions, and dispelled doubts. To my surprise and joy, without exception, everyone decided to participate in the program. Winston prepared all the necessary documents, and on Friday, we gathered for the official signing. It was a historic moment for the company. The day when Haddock Supply passed from the hands of one owner to a team of dedicated employees. After the ceremony, we had a small celebration in the office. There was champagne, cake, and toast to the future of the company. I watched the happy faces of the people who were now co-owners of the business and felt that I had made the right decision. When I got home, I took out the letter for Calvin, reread it again, and sealed it in an envelope without making any changes. Tomorrow I would mail it and put an end to this chapter of my life. In the morning, before taking the letter to the post office, I decided to take a walk. The day was clear and warm, even though it was early spring. I walked down the familiar streets of Mount Prospect, past the park where I had once walked with little Calvin, past the school where I had taken him by the hand in first grade, past the cafe where Evelyn and I had celebrated our wedding anniversaries. So many memories, so many stories were tied to this town. It's where most of my life has been, with all its joys and sorrows, its ups and downs. It's where Evelyn and I built a home, raised a son, built a successful business. It's where I lost my wife and now, in fact, my son. But strangely enough, I felt no bitterness. Of course, there was sadness about what could have been, about unfulfilled hopes, but a sense of peace and the rightness of the decision prevailed. I was freed from the weight of expectations and disappointments, from the pain of betrayal, from anger at my son and daughter-in-law. I did what I thought was fair, handed the company over to people who truly cared about it. I secured the future of my employees, many of whom had worked with me for decades, and I secured a future for myself, too. A peaceful old age, without want and worry, without toxic relationships destroying my sanity. As I walked past the post office, I paused for a moment, clutching the envelope with the letter for Calvin in my hand. The last step, the last word in our story. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. Stepping out of the post office, I felt oddly light, as if a weight had fallen from my shoulders. There was a new chapter of life ahead without the company that had been the center of my existence for so long, but with new opportunities and freedom. Maybe I would finally fulfill Evelyn's long-held dream and take that trip to Europe we had been putting off because of work. Maybe I'll take care of the garden she loves so much, which I neglected after her death. Maybe I'll find a new hobby, a new interest, a new meaning. Mrs. Jenkins waved at me from across the street. I smiled and waved back. She crossed the road and came up to me. "You look happy today, Orville," she said. "Did something good happen?" "Yes, Martha," I nodded. "Shelro, I made a big decision and I feel I did the right thing." "That's the most important thing," she smiled. "Doing what you think is right and not regretting it." "Exactly," I agreed. "Don't regret the past and look forward to the future." We walked, together talking about the weather, about her grandchildren, about the new baker at the local bakery. Ordinary, everyday topics, but they had their charm, their comfort. Life went on no matter what, and in that simple truth, I found unexpected peace and strength to go on, leaving behind the pain of betrayal and the bitterness of disappointment.